You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed, you just remember what your old pal said. Son, you got a friend in me. Yeah, you got a friend in me.
The bell and the wood thrush call us together in covenant, to awaken us from forgetfulness, that we may learn how to live in harmony and community. Today, let us especially remember our covenant to affirm and promote the sixth principle, the goal of world community, with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Good morning, hearty souls. It's January out there, but it feels like summer because we're in here. You're all getting bundled up for summer. Well, welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation at White Plains, New York, former home of the Lenape Nation and of Carolina Cherokees. I'm the Reverend Meredith Garmon, minister.
And I'm the Reverend Laura Kim Joyner. I'm a community minister affiliated with this congregation.
And I'm Adam Kent, music director for this congregation.
Welcome to this home of liberal religion, 5 characteristics of which include openness to new truth. Meaning has not been finally captured, nothing is complete, nothing is exempt from criticism, revelation is continuous.
Freedom. We strive to minimize coercion.
Justice. We are a people called to love, recognizing that justice is what looks like in public.
Institution building. Amid our conflicting perspectives and needs, we seek the power of organization and the organization of power.
Oh, well, nothing is guaranteed. We hope that meaningful change is possible.
Today is the 6th Sunday of winter, signified, or what would be signified by 6 oil lights on our altar, but we decided not to move those in here. The snow moon is waxing gibbous and will be full next Sunday, and the time of daylight is slowly growing, and today it's up to more than 10 hours.
And off script, don't forget to look for the comet that will be at the closest on Tuesday night, I believe. Look to the north and to the northeast. On the Christian calendar, today is the 4th Sunday of Ordinary Time. It's the time between Epiphany and Ash Wednesday.
We give a special welcome to our visitors. If you're here today and are comfortable being recognized, please put your hands for the welcome you. If you are here today online, please introduce yourself in the chat.
And for those online, I hope you all can hear us okay. You can find a link to the order of service on our website at cuucwb.org. For January, the Share to Play funds go to the Westchester Community College Student Emergency Fund, supporting students when they experience a temporary financial crisis and to keep them from dropping out. You can use the donate button on our website to contribute online and to the plate share, your pledge, and also the minister's discretionary fund.
And if you have a joy, sorrow, or milestone you'd like to share, we did move the Joys and Sorrows book into the table in the back. And for those of you at home on Zoom, you can enter it into the chat, making the first word joy, sorrow, or milestone. So we'll know which words are meant for us to speak aloud.
Announcements.
The giveaway common read for this year is The States in Europe, Congregations on the Road to Multiculturalism. Copies are available to purchase after Wednesday of throughout February. Pick one up and join us in reading together.
The Hunger and Homelessness team is holding a backpack drive to support next generation youth services. $40 buys a backpack, smaller amounts purchase supplies for drive-ins today, so do stop by the table.
We need volunteers for next Sunday's brunch on February 5th, coming up next Sunday.
Our environmental practices team meets next Sunday, February 5th at 9 a.m. in room 21. New members with an interest in environmental action are encouraged to join.
And our LGBTQ social justice team has an online meeting on Thursday, February 9th at 7 p.m. You may join them.
The summer services task force is planning this year's wonderful speakers for our summer worship services. If you'd like to speak at one of these, contact them, and they'll give you plenty of support so you can prepare.
Installment number 3 of our CUUC Odysseys will be today, immediately after the service. We will be presenting This Is Your Life, Ted Kaczynski. And for details about all of the above announcements, please do see your e-communitarian. If you're interested in becoming a member of CUUC, speak with me or contact the office to make an appointment. We have our congregation special announcement from Creighton Craig.
Good morning, I'm Craig Craig, Chair of the Board of Trustees. I hope you enjoyed the Mozart piano music that I was playing today. I'm actually taking a music theory class, and the professor told us that there have been many actual studies found that prove that the more you listen to Mozart, the more intelligent one becomes. So hopefully we all On a more serious note, I'd like to give you an update on 2 CUC delegates to the General Assembly and an update on our ministerial search process. The 2023 GUA General Assembly will be held in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in person and virtually from Wednesday, June 21st through Sunday, June 24th. And we are eligible to have 4 voting delegates represent us at the General Assembly. Over the 4 days, delegates participate in workshops, lectures, small group interactions, and the annual meeting association. A key issue at this year's General Assembly will be voting on the changes to the UUA bylaws, Article 2, Principles and Purposes, as proposed by the Article 2 Commission. A majority vote is required in year 1 of this Article 2 ratification process. A 2/3 majority will be required in year 2, 2024. We will be offering time for conversation and discussion about the proposed changes coming up in advance of General Assembly in June. If you're interested in being considered to be a delegate to GA or have questions, please contact Joe Mazak or myself on February 20th. As you know, we are in the process of going through a ministerial transition. And Meredith is retiring from us at the end of July this year. And our ministerial search process is underway. We are working to celebrate Meredith's time with us by having a congregation dinner on June 5th. And if you're interested in helping with this dinner, please contact Kathy Portland. We have completed the self-assessment. Forums will be held in February to review the results, and you all have been mailed a summary report to your house. We have outlined plans to renovate Parsons this summer. The Parsons has not been updated for over 20 years, and we're working to upgrade our website. The Board of Trustees has created a committee to create the search committee. This committee is comprised of 2 members from the Board of Trustees, Nikki Clemens and myself, 2 from the Committee on Ministry, Roki and Kevin McGarren Clemens, and 2 from Nominating and Leadership Development, Mary Caballero and Adina Usher. We will be having a congregational vote in April to elect the search committee. The search formation committee, now in April, will work hard to get feedback from the congregation on what type of members you want on the committee, as well as who should be on the search committee. Key things we'll be doing to prepare for the vote are, we'll be holding a forum Sunday, March 5th, in person and Zoom, and on Monday, March 13th via Zoom. Our UUA Congregational Life Consultant, Evan Carville-Zimmer, will be helping us lead these forums. We'll be also issuing a survey to all congregants in March, and then each of the search formation committee members will be attending one of the journey groups in March. In all these venues, we'll be asking for nominations, and one can self-nominate themselves as well. So in summary, there's a lot going on. I'm sure many of you are confused, but please don't hesitate to ask some questions. And we'll be talking more and more about this over the next several weeks. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Our opening hymn is I Know This Rose Will Open in your great hymnal. And what we're going to do, I'll get fired up. Adam's going to play through it once, then we'll sing it together in unison. Then we're going to divide. This part of the room is 1, this part of the room is 2. So the choir will lead you on this side, the choir will lead you on this side. We'll sing through it twice in parts. I will help do the whole thing, so just keep an eye on me until we don't know what to do.
I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will grow with wings. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will whirl its wings. I know this rose will open. I know this rose will open. I know my fear will burn away. I know my soul will whirl its wings. I know this rose will open.
On the sixth Sunday of the season, we dedicate our chalice to the sixth principle of our faith, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Please join me in the chalice loving words in your order of service. Each morning, we must hold our chalice of our being, to receive, to carry, to give back.
Our invocation this morning is from Reverend Joseph Cherry, and it is the epigraph for this year's CUUC Common Read, Mistakes and Miracles. If we have any hope of transforming the world and of changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to move into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, so loving. Our sung invocation is the Spirit of Truth word, which we sang for so many years here. And is it your service? Yes, excellent. know that the choir has rehearsed in this room, but have you ever performed in this room? Once. Okay, so this is not the debut performance of the Fellowship Hall Choir. Welcome to nonetheless.
Oh, sing hallelujah, come and sing the trouble, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah, joyfully sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah, come and sing the trouble, hallelujah. Hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, hallelujah, sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah. Sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, 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 oh sing hallelujah, hallelujah, sing hallelujah, hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah, joyfully sing hallelujah, oh sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. Oh, sing hallelujah. 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 Join me in a moment of prayer. Dear Spirit, life, and love, our hearts sing hallelujah, even as our hearts are heavy with the police abuse that killed Tyree Nichols earlier this month. The video released this week stunned and horrified us, just as we were told that it would. We noticed with mixed feelings that the authorities seem to have gotten better at orchestrating these events, releasing video after officers have already been fired and already charged with, in this case, second-degree murder, after numerous officials condemned the action and after warning us the video would be horrific and urging protests that they know will come to be peaceful. They've learned to orchestrate it all better than in the past, so why, oh God, can they not learn how to prevent officers from killing unarmed people in the first place? We are confused and angry that this could happen. The officers even knew they were being video recorded, had to know that from cameras on their bodies and on a nearby street post, the world would see what they were doing. And yet, they thought it was okay. We are confused and angry at this deep and flagrant betrayal of trust. O Spirit of life and love, be with us. Our hearts are heavy with the horror of shootings in California. On January 21st at Monterey Park, 11 killed and 9 others injured. And then 2 days later at Half Moon Bay, 7 killed and 8 critically injured.
Early yesterday, a shooting in an upscale Los Angeles neighborhood killed 3 and wounded 4 others. Spirit of life and love, be with us. We think of those who protest in support of women's rights. We think of the Afghanis affected by the ban on female aid workers, causing deprivation and starvation on a massive scale. We think of the war in Ukraine and the families of those British men killed while trying to evacuate people trapped on the Ukraine-Russia front line. We think of those families and friends anxiously waiting for news of people trying to cross borders, fleeing from oppression because of their sexuality or human rights or choice of religion. We think of the many mourning as the lack of COVID immunity hits the now open society across China. We think of those subjected to the effects of climate change, from Afghanistan to North Korea and Japan, from California to Texas and to Nova Scotia. We think with praise and gratitude of the fair trade coalitions and organizations worldwide, of the Portuguese government's attempts to return debt repayments to Cape Verde for green projects, and of Australians who now question the validity of Australia Day as it is increasingly seen as marking the oppression of indigenous people, and of scientists around the Baltic Sea who are using algal blooms and seaweed from the Dominican Republic in place of plastics. O spirits of life and love, may we have the wisdom to see and the courage to act. For what has been said aloud, and for all else that we are holding silently on our hearts today, we observe a minute of silence. Blessed be. Amen.
Good morning, all. The next hymn is in the teal hymn book. Hopefully, this one goes up. We will be singing number 1031 3 times through. Each time we sing it, we replace one of the words. The first time we sing I, the second time we will sing you, and the third time we sing we. Please stand if you're able.
May I be good with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be good with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and ease. May I be whole. May I be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you
I invite you now to extend to those around you your wishes and blessings of peace. And for those online, I invite you to extend your wishes and blessings of peace in the chats.
Good. How are you? A little, well, I'm not a super fan today. Mary, hi,
Gary, peace be with
Peace
you.
be with you. Good to see you too. We're getting there.
Don't we want to keep doing that for several more minutes? And brothers, your thought is over. We offer to each other words of peace as we come into this time of an offering of our resources. We are reminded with our principle this week of world community of peace, liberty, and justice for all. It begins in our hearts, in our homes, and in this, our congregation. It's a place of peacemaking, fairness, and free religion. We, as a people of faith, are called to build peace and justice. Understanding that violence is in every thought, word, or deed, treats being like an object or diminishes a being's sense of value or security. We are called to the work of ending violence because we know it's all through us in our cultures. Our congregation guides us in cultivating inner peace and the skills of compassion. The love and commitment we show each other here waters the tree of peace, liberty, and justice for everyone, every being, everywhere. From the resources we have, let us all now offer a portion to maintain and build this congregation.
Thank you. And can y'all hear me? Yep. The chorus in Tony Kushner's musical Carolina Change sings at one point, change comes slow and change comes fast. Sometimes, am I on? All right, I will repeat what I said. First, the chorus in Tony Kushner's musical Caroline Change sings at one point, change comes slow and change comes fast. And change is, of course, often and incremental, but it can be miraculous too, as I think is expressed in this spiritual. The angels changed my name. I went to the hillside, I went to pray. I know the angels done changed my name, for the coming day. Thank God the angels done changed my name. And this is an arrangement by the British composer of African descent, Samuel Coleridge Taylor.
Back to Greg again. We're going to be singing "We'll Build the Land," all four verses, but in between each verse, we will listen to Meredith. So we'll stay seated while we sing each verse.
You may want to keep a finger in place. Did you hear? For about 20 years, I have been, from time to time, meeting with one group or another of newcomers to Unitarian Universalism. Sometimes these groups include longtime members as well. I've done this in Nashville, Tennessee, in El Paso, Texas, in Gainesville, Florida, and from time to time for the last 9.5 years here in White Plains. And I asked the group, what drew you to Unitarian Universalism? And the answers vary, of course, but there are two themes that always predominate across the years and across the places. Asked what they like about Unitarian Universalism, UUs will often say some variation of, I love being at a place where other people think like me. And just as often, in my experience, UUs will say some variation of, I love being at a place where people are so different. I love the variety. And these answers are not contradictory. If you resonate with both of those answers, there's no cognitive dissonance here. We do have some things in common. We have good things in common here that aren't all that common in the wider world. One of those things is the heritage that we come into here. The heritage that becomes your heritage when you become a Unitarian Universalist. The heritage of religious freedom, reason, and tolerance that stretches back 450 years in Europe and was picked up about 225 years ago in this country. The heritage of resistance to Calvinist ideas of human depravity and predestination. Of 19th century abolitionists, of the Unitarian reshaping of the Christmas holiday, of the 1930s humanists in our churches, of the Unitarian Service Committee's work in World War II to help get Jews out of Nazi-occupied areas, of the civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War movements that found religious grounding in our congregations, as well as the heritage of all the ways that we and our forebears have fallen short, have failed to have the wisdom to see and the courage to act. We have all that in common. We are the carriers forward of all of that heritage. But before you learned about any of that, before you'd seen even one UU minute or read about any of our history, you would have noticed here a prevailing appreciation of diversity, a way of being together that prizes learning from each other and growing and changing in ways that don't happen as well in groups where all the people have very similar knowledge and styles and habits and expectations. One of the key ways that we are alike is that we are high in openness to difference. We like our differences, and we would like to have more. We would like this congregation to be more multicultural than it is. That's what we've said, and we weren't lying. We might criticize ourselves for not being as committed to becoming more multiculturally welcoming as we think we could be. But I believe our various surveys and focus group discussions that again and again affirm that we do want more diversity here. Unitarian Universalists, and I have been one my whole life, have been struggling with this for as long as I remember. Our similarities, which include an appreciation of difference, also include factors that have limited our denomination's multicultural appeal. Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones spent decades facilitating racial equity workshops, and they've identified features of an organization's culture that can limit its welcome of cultural diversity. Unitarian Universalist culture is pretty low on some of these, and low in a good way, because it means low on a barrier to welcoming more diverse cultures. But we are not low on all of them, and if we set our minds to it, we could further lower each of these 8 barriers to multiculturalism. 1, perfectionism. This is the belief or the implicit operating assumption that there is one right way to do things, a best practice attainable and desirable for everyone, and that somebody in power is qualified to know what this perfect way is. 2, either or binary thinking. This reduces the complexity of life and nuance of our relationships with each other and all living things into either or, yes or no, right or wrong, in ways that reinforce urgency and perfectionism. 3, denial and defensiveness, specifically denying and defending the ways in which barriers to multicultural welcome are erected and maintained. 4, conflict avoidance. An organization that prioritizes making everyone comfortable cannot have open conflict, and so it cannot develop an ethos of love and respect in the midst of conflict. Conflict is inevitable where truly different cultures are brought together, so stifling conflict entails stifling voices. 5, individualism. Our cultural story that we make it on our own without help while pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps is a toxic denial of our essential interdependence and the reality that we are, in fact, all in this together. 6, the goal is always more. This goal implies that what we're after has to be objectively measurable. The emphasis on measurable quantity overlooks the importance of the quality of our relationships to all living beings. 7, idolizing the written word, ignoring the wide range of ways we communicate with each other and all living things, treating every problem as if it were solvable by specifying in writing what the policy going forward will be. And 8, urgency. Now, Martin Luther King spoke of the fierce urgency of now, of the need for action over complacency. But when every day-to-day concern becomes urgent, we fail to see the power imbalance that is maintained by keeping everyone frenetically busy. We fail to meet our own need to breathe and to pause and reflect. These are some of the key features of an organizational culture that inhibits becoming multiculturally welcoming. To create a culture that's more multicultural, we look for ways to lower those barriers. As we move forward, there's some things we should notice that some very popular approaches to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, have not worked. In 2016, the Harvard Business Review ran a cover story about how diversity training was often backfiring, making things worse. These trainings teach people about bias, combat stereotypes, encourage people to assume the perspectives of others in a disadvantaged group. Alexandra Kalev and Frank Dobbin studied nearly 830 U.S. companies. On average, 5 years after implementing compulsory diversity training for managers, companies saw declines in the numbers of some demographic groups, African American women and Asian American men and women, and no improvement among white women and other minorities. Other social science studies have shown that efforts to reduce prejudice increase bias or lead to more hostility rather than less. David Brooks summarized the reasons that Dobbin and Kalev offered that these programs don't work. First, short-term educational interventions in general do not change people. This is as true for worker safety courses as it is for efforts to combat racism. Second, some researchers argue that the training activates stereotypes in people's minds rather than eliminate them. Third, training can make people complacent, thinking that because they went through the program, they've solved the problem. 4, the mandatory training makes many white participants feel left out, angry, and resentful, actually decreasing their support for workplace diversity. And 5th, people don't like to be told what to think, and they may rebel if they feel that they're being pressured to think a certain way. So, having our own congregational version of a DEI training probably won't be helpful. And then, last week I learned about the work of Australian political scientist Karen Stenner. Stenner argues that underlying racism and intolerance is something more fundamental that she calls differenceism, a fundamental and overwhelming desire to establish and defend some collective order of oneness and sameness. Another term for this is authoritarian personality. In one of Stenner's studies, people scoring high for authoritarian personality were told that NASA had verified the existence of alien life, beings, quote, very different from us in ways we are not yet even able to imagine. After being told that, the measured racial intolerance of authoritarian subjects decreased by half. In other words, they are afraid of whatever is most different. If there are space aliens out there, then suddenly all humans are us, because the authoritarian personality's animosity focuses on whatever is most different. Stenner writes, black people look a lot more like us than them when there are green people afoot. Under these conditions, the authoritarians didn't only become kinder to black people, noted, they also became more merciful to criminals, that is, less inclined to want a crackdown on perceived moral deviance. Stenner's book, The Authoritarian Dynamic, concludes that not everyone can learn to respect and value difference. She writes, all the available evidence indicates that exposure to difference, talking about difference, and applauding difference are the surest way to aggravate those who are innately intolerant and to guarantee the expression of their predispositions in manifestly intolerant attitudes and behaviors. Journalist Connor Friedersdorf estimates that perhaps 15% of all humans are psychologically ill-suited to dealing with difference. He does not indicate where that 15% figure comes from. It seems to be his impressionistic guess. As a rough ballpark estimate, maybe that's about right. Whatever the number might be, we're never going to fix every individual. So we need systems that neutralize the authoritarian personalities from inflicting their phobias on others. Dr. Sonia Kang, professor at the University of Toronto, says there's always going to be some portion of the population that is unreachable. That's where the organizational design piece becomes even more important. Because if you have someone who's not willing to change, and they, let's say, are a racist, and they got into a position where they're in charge of hiring, you want to have the structures or the processes, the procedures set up in such a way that it doesn't matter. They can be racist, but the structure that you've built is so equitable that their bias can't play in there. I would rather see those resources put into building the structures that allow them to exist without messing things up for everyone else. And Lily Zheng, a DEI strategy consultant, concurred, adding, we should work around the racists to neutralize the impact that their racism can cause. If you design an organization that's equitable enough and inclusive enough, I really do strongly believe that you can neutralize the impact of people who, I don't know, maybe are unsavory, maybe who just frankly aren't perfect. The over-focus of the industry on ensuring that we're perfect people, I think, is a complete waste of time and resources. We should design organizations that are equitable and inclusive, whether or not every single person inside those organizations is inclined the same way. So where does that leave us? On the one hand, Unitarian Universalists tend not to be authoritarian personalities. We affirmatively prize diversity and difference, and we tend to score high on measures of openness to new experience, precisely what authoritarian personalities score low on. On the other hand, as noted, we are finding the road to multiculturalism difficult. This year's UUA Common Read is Mistakes and Miracles, and it's all about Unitarian Universalist congregations on this road to multiculturalism, the mistakes made, the grace that can sometimes break through. You can help our congregation on our road to multiculturalism by getting and reading this book and joining in the conversations about how we can change. The first prerequisite for change is We really have to want it. And the book highlights 5 UU congregations, what they tried, what didn't work, some of what did. Joe Majak's going to tell us something about what he learned from the chapter about our Phoenix congregation, and then Jeff Tomlinson will speak about lessons from our Tulsa congregation. But first, verse number 2.
So just a reminder, we're staying seated while we sing.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Joe Majak. I've been a member of this congregation since 1988. And Meredith, don't start your clock yet, but I want to add a comment to your comments. 2 weeks ago, this congregation hosted the Jubilee 3 workshop, and we very intentionally took out the word training. If you look at the book, at the website and all the other references to Jubilee 3, it says Jubilee 3 training. And this congregation did not gather to be trained. This congregation gathered to work together. I'll leave you with that. Meredith asked for Jeff Tomlinson. You can start the clock. Meredith asked Jeff Tomlinson and I to pick a congregation. I chose Phoenix because our current president, Susan Frederick Gray, was the minister of that congregation. I'm a big fan of hers. I have 8 quick stories to share. There are 2 mistakes, and the rest are all miracles because I'm an optimist. So the first mistake, in the late 1950s, UUCP, that's the Phoenix congregation, they fled downtown backlash from conservative McCarthyism advocates, claiming that UUCP was a communist front group. So UUCP was forced out of one rental location out of the next, as the city organizations kept UUCP at arm's length. The congregation decided to locate in a remote, upscale suburban neighborhood. How do they avoid the image of a well-to-do, set-apart congregation? How do you make UUCP accessible to accessible to Phoenix's financially and segregated residents? They built an unwelcome fortress of a building with a windowless wall facing the street. It was a huge edifice isolating UUCP from the public. So they found their spot, but they built a fortress that's totally unwelcome. Mistake number 2. UUCP was organized as a fellowship, and they developed an early culture of individualism, which Meredith just touched upon, where members focused on individual needs and opinions and threatened to leave the congregation and bring their money with them, instead of building a culture celebrating individuality. That's where people's unique personalities and contribution add richness to the group, even as the group's needs rank higher than any one person's needs. Rugged individualism can keep people isolated from each other and hamper the ability to rally around a mission and move forward together. Now, here's the miracle. In the 80s, UUCP helped establish the Arizona ACLU chapter, and they voted to join a local sanctuary movement. They worked with a downtown council to draw people to UUCP by catching their attention. Social justice work continued, but it was driven by individuals. That work was driven by individuals within the congregation and not the leadership or the mission of that congregation. That pattern continued to 2007. The inward transformation was lacking, and it was the result of a culture avoiding conflict. The next miracle was the UUCP Social Action Committee, supported by Reverend Susan Frederick Ray, deciding that immigration reform deserved a full call to ministry rather than just one of their social action initiatives. The whole congregation embarked on a process of education, engagement, and reflection. They conducted workshops, they had movie nights, they conducted worship services focusing on the plight of immigrants, especially from the South. In 2010, Reverend Susan Frederick Ray got arrested with 30 other UUs. Her visibility made a huge difference on UUCP's visibility and credibility in the wider community. The congregation became more unified in support of immigration social justice. As a result of the immigration activism, more people of color visitors appear at UUCP Sunday services. They shifted from a fellowship to a pastoral family congregation. Individual members learn how to follow instead of leading. The momentum from an I to a we gains momentum for them, and they experience an influx of people of color members. A miracle is after the 2010 GA, Reverend Susan and the BOT for the congregation decided to institutionalize its multicultural mission and vision. They crafted an intentional statement of commitment to the goal of building multicultural, anti-racist, beloved community, and it was one sign that a congregation or its leadership is serious about making the internal changes for this goal. The next miracle was UUCP leaders poured their energies into transforming the culture of welcoming. In every congregation studied, members of color always mention the quality of the welcome they experience when they walk in the door. Leaders focus on the culture of welcoming. In a highly individualistic culture, people don't want to intrude in other people's spaces. In more communal cultures, warm embraces and expressions of affection help bind people together in kinship. For UUCP, their active involvement in immigration marches and other social action events won them over. These people are not just do-gooders, but they will take action. The message: take action and avoid the reputation of do-gooders in word only. The next to last miracle is visible symbols of inclusion help make many newcomers feel at home. UUCP displayed rainbow flags and banners outside the front door, which reflected the congregation's vision. The posters out front have made the church look so much more welcoming by showing diversity in the panels, said one member. UUCP signage continues to evolve to match its vision. The display of banners makes newcomers feel at home. Signage matches vision. The last miracle, UUCP learned that it's important that white congregants become aware of their own microaggressions and other forms of discrimination and work to stop making these mistakes, which confirm the expectations of many people of color. Church member Jeff longs for everyone to feel more compassion and find more humor in the inevitable mistakes people make, especially white people. Jeff's own humor is sometimes sardonic and biting, which I can relate to, sometimes silly and refreshing. It almost always cuts through the tension and creates new common ground. Sometimes when the Spirit shines forth and people learn to take risks to make the world right for someone else, that intention, however clumsily executed, has a positive impact. And it helps to build the bridges needed toward the beloved community. Humor is a key tool. Thank you.
Verse 3.
So let's join in singing verse 3. We'll build a land.
Really don't want to hold this, but I guess I got to. Okay. So I have chapter 5, the All Souls Unitarian Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that's quite a story, quite different than probably any other story, because what ends up happening in the story is that the Pentecostal church merges with the Unitarian Universalist church. Quite a story. And I had to go through the story a little bit beyond my impressions and share that in 1996, it all starts in 1996 with the Rwanda massacre in Africa, right? The bishop of the Pentecostal church is watching the horrific massacre of people in Rwanda and starts to have visions of universal salvation. Interesting, huh? The bishop ends up, all his sermons switch to universal salvation. He starts to preach this very strongly in a congregation of 6,000 people. And eventually his national organization catches on, and he's labeled a heretic, and he loses most of his congregation. Right? The UU minister in Tulsa sees what's going on and reaches out to the bishop, and they develop a friendship together. During their friendship, of course, the bishop points out that All Souls Church doesn't quite live up to its name. It's All Souls. Why is the congregation all white? So at one point, this spurs the UU congregation minister to do a survey of their church and look at what's going on in their church. And he finds out that the 90% of the UU congregation wants to have diversity, but doesn't know how to go about it. Does that sound familiar to us? Right. So eventually the UU minister invites the bishop to have his services at their church at 11:30 in the morning on Sundays. Right? And that's the beginning. It starts in the summertime when things are a little bit quieter at a UU church usually. And the Pentecostal congregation starts to attend at the UU church. And gradually, the UU members are attracted to the Pentecostal service. They're interested and curious about the high energy and liveliness of the service and start attending more and more. And it's the same thing happens with the Pentecostals. They become more open and more curious about the Unitarian service. So the Pentecostal minister becomes worried, though, during that summer, that the culture of their services might be too difficult for the UU congregation, that they're too loud, that they sing too long, they stand uncomfortably too long, right? And he's worried and hoping for a compromise to occur. Well, when the summer ends, the Pentecostal services don't end. And some of the UU members start to become concerned about what's going on here, right? And it just starts to develop talk about discomfort and so forth. And one person says at one point, it's one thing to have people say they support racial justice and would talk about protesting, marching, and sitting at lunch counters, but not tolerate Black folk under the roof of All Souls Church. So there are tensions on both sides. For the first 3 years, the church offers 3 distinct services: a humanist hour at 8 a.m. I never knew humanists could get up that early. Traditional service at 10, and then a contemporary, more Pentecostal service at 11:30. Some UU members start to complain that all they're hearing about is Jesus, and the Pentecostal members start to complain that they're not hearing enough about the Bible. Right? So, they start to talk about how change can influence what they see and hear. The sense that they are not getting enough of what they already know and love is painful for them. The book goes on to quote Reverend Dr. John Wolf, and says that there are always more than one congregation operating within a religious community, which I found interesting. When you look at ours, I think that's probably true. Right? The particular interests of different groups influence how the members of these groups engage. So at one point, a meeting is called together, and when the UU congregants who want the church to go back to the way it was, meet with the other congregants throughout the church and start to hear that there's great excitement. The majority of people in the congregation have great excitement about the merger and are very positive about it. Those who are opposed to the change start to change their mind. They start to make a commitment to working it out. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I was going to look a little bit. That's all right. In 2016, a consultant comes to the congregation. UUs love to use consultants from the UUA and so forth. And they're advised to develop a mission statement, and that works. The congregation all of a sudden starts to find unity in a common mission of where they're headed for the future. Right? And at one point the book says, this is how we're choosing to try to make this real. We can argue over strategy, but we can't argue over direction. Okay? This is the community we're trying to create: democratic, artistic, theologically free, covenant-based, inclusive, diverse, compassionate, and loving. If you're trying to create this kind of community, this kind of world, then you're in the right place. Stick around and help us do it. Okay. So from there, the congregation has now flourished. Thank you, John. They're making a lot of progress now in their congregation, and they've gone on to do a lot of work, including doing a lot of anti-racism and multicultural workshops. They build capacity for interracial conversations and a new structure for sharing power. This is just a brief overview, and I encourage you to read the Tulsa story. I think it has, although I don't imagine a large group of Pentecostal people joining us anytime soon, I think the magnitude of the change magnified many of the process issues that we face as a congregation. And so it lays them out very clearly for us. So I encourage you to read the Tulsa story. Thank you.
So as Adam mentioned, the change is often incremental and halting. And then he introduced a piece by Samuel Coleridge Taylor that referred to being renamed. And that is a reference to the Jacob story in Genesis, where Jacob is wrestling with a stranger. Who is it? Is it God? Is it an angel? We don't know. My colleague, Reverend Abijana Manchi, who served in a neighboring church in Florida while I was a minister in the state, describes this story. He says, Jacob prevails, but he doesn't win, and he's wounded in the process. And
And the stranger blesses him and renames him Israel. That's the getting renamed bit, which means the one who has striven with God. That's a powerful metaphor for what we are called to be in this world as Unitarian Universalists. It calls for us to be open to the spiritual discomfort of engaging with the other, to be present in that way, and to know that we will come out of that experience transformed and renamed. Part of our spiritual task is to develop the muscle, the spiritual muscle, to be present to that discomfort and pain. And this is where I think we have growing up to do. Being by nature conflict averse, we want to quickly move to the resolution phase where we can just be renamed and carry on. But it's going to be slow. It's going to be halting and incremental. So relax, breathe, step into the journey. The practice pointer you're about to hear is about relaxing. We need to take moments to relax so that we can gear up for the journey ahead. Blessed be. Amen.
Relax. That's this week's practice pointer, adapted from Just One Thing by clinical psychologist Rick Hansen. Relax. It's easy to feel stressed, worried, or frustrated about finances, work, relationships, or the health of a family member. The body tenses up to fight, flee, or freeze. That's how our ancestors stayed alive to pass on their genes. But we pay a high long-term price for daily tension. Anxiety, irritability, depression, heart disease, backaches, headaches, indigestion. The number one way to reduce tension is through relaxation. Besides its benefits for physical and mental health, relaxation feels great. Just recall how nice it feels to soak in a tub, curl up in bed, or plop on the couch after the dishes are done. Being able to relax your body at will is a critically important inner skill. It's all about the PNS, the parasympathetic nervous system, one of 3 divisions of the autonomic nervous system. The PNS is your rest and digest system. It slows the heart rate to conserve energy while increasing intestinal and gland activity. Activating the PNS calms down the fight or flight system. Here are 4 ways to do that. 1, since it's connected with digestion, PNS fibers fill the mouth. So relax your tongue and jaw. Perhaps touch your lips. Opening your lips slightly can help quiet the stressful, sub-vocalized inner chatter. 2, take 3 deep breaths with long, slow exhales. 3, take a minute calibrating inhale and exhale. Breathe in such a way that your inhalation and exhalation are equally long. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. 4, breathe from the diaphragm. That is, let the belly expand with each inhale rather than the chest. You'll find more helpful details at the full post at cucmatters.org.
Please join me in singing hymn from the Teal Book, number 1028, Fire of Commitment, and stand if you would like.
Praise
Please, please stand. Get ready for becoming an evangelical congregation. Thank you all so much for being with us this morning. And now we can clap. Let's applaud in gratitude for our musicians, our tech team, our ministers, and our ushers. And there's going to be a great event right after this. We're going to have our today's Odyssey program that we're going to have. And so just grab a quick cup of coffee in Fellowship Hall. We just need to turn around, grab the cup, and come on back. We'll be hearing from the life of Ted. And parents who do not plan on staying for the Odyssey, please go get your children from childcare before you enjoy coffee. And put your name tag in the basket, probably on the entryway in the hallway. And for those online, you can stay logged into this worship room for the Odyssey program. After the program ends, you may log out and log in to our virtual coffee hour Zoom room. The link is on our website and somebody will post it into the chat. As we extinguish the chalice here, those at home are invited to extinguish their chalices. And let's all say together these chalice extinguishing words. The beacon of peace, the torch of liberty, the fire of justice, we will take with us in our hearts, that it may light the way to world unity for every child of this earth.
And for those of you who seek God, may God be with you. For those who embrace life, may life return your affection. And for those who seek a better way, may the path be found and the courage to take it step by step. Go in peace.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart on the streams of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Whose holy